By the way, what I'm talking about was covered in the movie The Darkest Hour, which was like it was a pretty terrible movie. It had maybe generally the correct history, but there's a scene where Churchill goes into the subway, the underground in London, and he talks to the people. It never happened. It's ridiculous. But anyway, um, so Churchill is appointed prime minister after Halifax declines the offer on May 10th, 1940. He was 65. He had been a major figure in British politics really since the early 1900s. He had served as head of the British Navy during World War One. He had had a remarkable career in a career that was full of ups and downs. He was notorious because he wanted to maintain the British Empire. He wanted to maintain control of India, for instance, really up until the minute India became independent. He's very unpopular to this day in India. He's seen as basically pretty evil. It's kind of interesting how your perceptions of a figure can be shaped by how you intersect with that figure. But he becomes prime minister. This was something his father had been prime minister. And he said, I felt like I was walking with destiny and that all my past life had been preparation for this hour and for this trial, and that I was sure I would not fail. And I've been to the where Churchill. There's a great Churchill museum in London near where the war room was, and there's this quote of Churchill. He says, "Yes, I know all humans are worms, but I believe I'm a glowworm." You know, he did have a good sense of humor. Anyway, so when Churchill takes office in May 10th, 1940, that's the very day that Hitler moves into Belgium, Holland, and France. And his Hitler's position in the parliament as prime minister, he's fairly weak. Neville Chamberlain has been deposed as prime minister, but he's still in the war cabinet, the 5-person war cabinet. And Churchill does something special. He doesn't boot Neville Chamberlain out of his home on 10 Downing Street. He says, sure, take as long as you need. And ultimately, Chamberlain will support Hitler when push comes to shove a couple of weeks later. And, maybe this act of decency on the part of Churchill played some role in Chamberlain's decision to support him. So Neville Chamberlain is still there, and he does have support. Halifax is in the war cabinet as well, and he has support as well among the Conservative Party. Churchill is nominally the head of the Conservative Party, but he had switched parties, which is something we don't really see much in the United States. So no one really trusted Churchill. He was kind of a party of one in that sense. The conservatives didn't trust him. The Labor Party didn't trust him. So when he comes into office, he has to be really careful. He just doesn't have a lot of institutional power. Now, he would gain institutional power, but he doesn't have it initially. He's kind of seen maybe as a stopgap leader. And the reason that he'd been appointed is he'd been so publicly opposed to Hitler in the 1930s when most other British politicians were willing to live with Hitler. So the big question becomes, should the British negotiate with Hitler, especially after the lightning defeat of Belgium, Holland, and especially France? And then during the same period, the British Army, about 350,000 men, is finding refuge on the beach at Dunkirk. And during this period, it has not been saved yet. Ultimately, as I think most of you know, the British Army is evacuated from Dunkirk. It does come back to England, and it lives to fight another day. But during this period that I'm talking about, it was very unclear what the fate of the British Army would be. So this is about as dire as it gets. This is dire. Things are going about as bad as they possibly could be going. So push comes to shove between May 24th and May 28th, 1940. The British troops are at the beaches at Dunkirk, across the channel. They look doomed. And during this period, Lord Halifax, on his own, approaches the Italian ambassador. And the Italians still have an ambassador in Great Britain during this period. And he basically wants to open up Halifax, Churchill's rival, but who's in the very powerful five-person war cabinet. Halifax approaches the Italian ambassador. He's trying to create some kind of corridor where through the Italians, and of course, I haven't talked much about Italy, but Italy is Hitler's ally, Mussolini. He's trying to use the Italians as an avenue to get to Hitler and to be able to start negotiating with Hitler. So Halifax starts meeting with the Italian ambassador during this period. And he basically says that the British would never look down or completely reject a proposal that would create a secure and peaceful Europe. In other words, that the British are willing to make a deal with Hitler through Italy. And this is the big thing to keep in mind. Halifax, very powerful figure in Great Britain, is talking to the Italian ambassador, but in reality, he's talking to the Germans. And the message that he's sending is, hey, are you willing to make peace with us? Are you willing to allow us to surrender with dignity? If you are, and if you'll make certain guarantees in terms of allowing us to retain our autonomy and that kind of thing, then we will seriously consider your offer. So Halifax, kind of on his own, is creating this off-site negotiations with the Germans through the Italian ambassador, which is kind of extraordinary. But again, he's a very powerful man in Great Britain. He's used to having this authority. And Halifax clearly was willing to make some kind of a deal with Hitler. There doesn't seem to be any doubt about it. The historical record really bears this out. And this is what I mean when I'm saying if another person had been in power during these key days in May, the situation would have been very different from what it turned out to be. And this just shows the importance, at least in this case, of certain individuals in history. But Halifax wasn't the prime minister. He was a powerful person. He was in the British government, but he wasn't the prime minister. And he's got to deal with Churchill, who's a very expert politician.